My name is from our ICTR at UW, and really am delighted to welcome Rick Burke from Marshfield Clinic. Rick is a research specialist at the National Farm Medicine Center and National Children's Center for Rural and Agricultural Health and Safety, focusing on injury epidemiology, agricultural injury surveillance, and research methodology. Sorry about the interference. He received his Master of Public Health from SUNY Upstate Medical University and Syracuse University with a focus on epi and biostats, applying public health research methods to national data sets, such as the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. Rick works closely with Dr. Brian Weichelt at NFMC, joining in 2019, focusing on injury surveillance, survey methods, mHealth, and telehealth. And we are delighted to welcome him here to our clinical trials community of practice session today and learn from everything that he has discovered in his work. Thank you, Rick, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I'll go ahead and share my screen and then we can just jump right in. All right, so I'm here to talk a bit about some Facebook advertising campaigns that we undertook for some of our studies, what we learned, what worked well, what didn't work well, and then how that can be applied to some recruitment for either clinical trials or other human subjects research that you're interested in running or are currently running and are thinking of supplementing some of the recruitment efforts for that. So I'll give you a little bit of background on us first. As I'm sure many of you are aware, the Marshfield Clinic Health Center has about 60 locations throughout North and Central Wisconsin, including over 250 staff and 40 PhD and MD scientists engaging in medical research. Within the Research Institute in the health system, we have 5 different research offices, of which I work with 2, primarily the National Farm Medicine Center, but I also have a hand in the Center for Clinical Epidemiology and Population Health a bit, which does a lot more of the medical research and clinical trials work within the Research Institute. As well, the Farm Medicine Center hosts the Children's Center for Rural and Agricultural Health and Safety, which is one of 11 NIOSH-funded ag health and safety centers across the country. We're number 3 on the map right there in Wisconsin, and then we also co-host the Upper Midwest Agricultural Safety and Health Center, which is based out of the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. And so we recently celebrated our 25th anniversary last year. And we are also the only NIOSH Ag Center that is national in scope. The rest are all very regional for where they're located. And here's the team that we have working on our project within this NCRAS core. Unfortunately, Dr. Weichelt couldn't be with us today. He had a couple of things come up, but if you have any questions or anything later on that I'm not able to answer, then I'll happily forward your questions over to him or anything. As well as Dr. Kondam Kung from the University of Maryland. He's a communications professor there who helped a lot with our study that we're running. And then our communications and outreach team here, Scott and Melissa, were also very helpful in running these Facebook ads and kind of setting up everything behind the scenes and handling a lot of the public inquiry and comments and engagements that we had during our advertising campaign. So here's a bit of background on the project itself. We know that there's a high incidence of child ag injuries across the US. Young workers, those under 18, are almost 8 times as more likely to be fatally injured working in agriculture compared to youth in all other industries combined. And almost half of all fatal injuries that occurred to young workers in the US occurred in agriculture, despite agriculture being one of the smaller industries in terms of number of workers in the US. Additionally, every day there's about 33 children that are injured in ag-related incidents. And on average, every 3 days, a child is fatally injured in an agriculture-related incident. And so this prompted several years ago us to start the aginjurynews.org initiative, where we collected agricultural injury news reports. So it initially started as just a collection of physical newspaper clippings that we had in our office, which then was formalized into an online database, which we scrape online news agencies and social media and police scanners and the like in order to collect these injuries and then organize them. We code them with various schemes, and we're currently over 5,000 reports for the past 7 years now, with over 4,200 incidents detailed. In doing this, our team manually goes through and codes all of these reports, including the occupational injury and illness classification system, the farm and ag injury classification, as well as things like the injury agents, what caused the injury, and where it occurred. So while working on this, it kind of started shifting our team's views on child ag safety. We were having stricter safety practices with our kids whenever we're around farms. A lot of our office grew up in that environment, and they've now been much more strict with what they're allowing their kids to do and how they're managing safety on their own farm. So that prompted the question, do these news stories impact the general population like that they were impacting our team? So as for the study itself, we conducted a randomized control trial with a pre and post test, specifically assessing farm parents' knowledge, attitudes, and their intended behaviors towards child ag safety. The intervention being, we'd have them read through 4 news articles. Our experimental group would read through injury articles that we had saved in Ag Injury News. And then the other half were generic agriculture-related news stories, but nothing to do with injuries. So like farm life articles, such as, a child really getting into agriculture, essentially. This was conducted over 6 weeks, and we offered a $50 incentive. And I will talk a bit about whether or not it seemed helpful to advertise if you're providing an incentive or some sort of compensation for participating in research. So we knew we wanted to recruit farm parents, so we wanted to consider how to best go about that. There's a lot of traditional mailing services, telephone services. Farm market ID is a big one in agriculture, but those come with their own limitations and can generally be more expensive. There's also a lot of ag groups such as Future Farmers of America, 4-H, but that can be very regional, and it can be hard to get a representative sample from that. So we turned to advertisements on social media, specifically Facebook. We knew that there was an increasing rural broadband usage across the country, and we're targeting farm parents with young children. And we know that social media in general has a younger demographic compared to the national average. That is changing a little bit, at least on Facebook, as we're moving forward. But when it comes to agricultural populations, it's still much younger than the average age of farmers in the US. So for our recruitment goals, we wanted to recruit 200 farm parents for this study, which were at least 18 years of age and had children age 14 or younger. And the child had to either live or work on a farm, either full or part-time. So, if they lived with one parent, say during the winter, and then in the summer they went to work on the farm, we'd want to include them as well. We initially had one phase of recruitment, but we did have some difficulty recruiting our target of 200 farm parents. And so that was then extended into a second phase. And so our initial budget was $6,000 for the advertisements on Facebook over the course of 4 weeks, which worked out to about $1,500 a week. These ads were hosted on the Children's Center Facebook page, which is already well established with over 1,000 likes and follows. It has pretty good social capital, we think, with the communities that we serve. We do post there about once every day, once every work day. So we are regularly engaging with the community on this platform. And then after we had posted the ads and everything, I'll show you shortly what those looked like. Those linked to a quick screener survey where we would ask, we would provide the additional study information and the informed consent form. And then we would record their eligibility criteria. So if they were parents, any children, what ages they were, as well as some farm demographics, which proved very helpful later on in terms of identifying some sham and spam responses. And then we collected an email field for further communication. But whichever is easiest for your study, you can also collect phone number, a study web page, or an account of some sort in any online portal that you have. Really, the opportunities there are endless. And so with the ads manager itself, that's how you set up a Facebook ad, technically through Meta now. And so there's an example of one of our first round of ads on the right side, which was in the fall of 2021. So the first and foremost thing you want to do when setting an ad is defining your audience. We opted to go straight for our inclusion criteria, which was parents, age of 18. Facebook has many different industries and interests that you can include, as well as an employment industry field. They do not separate agriculture out from fishing and forestry, as it's usually combined for a lot of NIOSH and OSHA regulations. But we were able to, with that criteria, have an audience of about 2 million people, all in the US. So that's the amount of people that Facebook expected would be eligible to see our ad. Now, as you'll see, our first phase didn't recruit as many as we need. So we decided to later broaden our horizons there to just parents and rely on the wording and imagery of the ad for them to self-select out non-farm parents. This increased our audience about 100 times, which was very nice, but as I'll show you, it then caused a lot of ineligible participants to complete our screener survey. And the way you're charged on Facebook is usually you can set it to be shown by how many times, to be charged by how many times it is shown to people, or however many times people click on the link. Usually charge per click is more efficient and cheaper. But if you are going a broader audience than your intended inclusion criteria, then you will lose a little bit of value from that. And so our initial campaign ran for 4 weeks from September to October, or 4 months, or yes, 4 weeks, sorry, in September to October in 2021 with a narrow targeting. And we did get some pretty reasonable response rates, but we also didn't have a ton of engagement with Facebook users. But most of the engagement, such as comments or replies we had, were pretty positive. People were pretty receptive to wanting to increase child egg safety, especially when we're focusing that campaign on farm parents specifically. And then that following winter, so this would have been last winter, January of 2020, we ran for an additional 3 weeks. We had initially budgeted for 4 weeks, but we were able to hit our target recruitment goal and had cut that short in order to save on the budget. And so with the broader targeting, we got a higher response rate from that, much better cost per click, people clicking on the ads. But because it's a much larger audience, we did have more mixed engagements. We didn't have really any negative comments or feedback, on the first campaign. It really required very little intervention on our part, running and monitoring the ad. However, the second phase did have some more negative feedback, I'll just say, and I'll show you some examples later on. And so a few things that we found helped a lot with these ads on Facebook was having a reputable host page, especially if you're advertising that you are paying people for anything. People might be wary that it's a scam of some sort, which are getting fairly common on Facebook, especially on Marketplace. So having a page that you can host it through that is already well established is very valuable in kind of assuaging some of those concerns. The other is having eye-catching imagery. You want people to look at your ad, obviously, but it needs to be restrained and within reason. So for example, our imagery here is an overturned tractor, but it's during a firefighter rescue training. And so it was a much more controlled environment that picture was taken in. Facebook has their own guidelines and criteria for imagery, nothing explicit or anything like that, as well as your IRB might have concerns as well, because you're showing these ads to users before they can consent to your study. So you need to be relatively restrained in the images that you're going to be showing them. And then the other thing is the descriptors, both on top and bottom for your ad, should be enticing and very short and concise if possible. We found that advertising that it is paid does get a much better response, but then that does open yourself up to more people who are going to be interested in trying to game the system and are trying to essentially scam you out of that incentive. So you're going to need safeguards in place for that. And even if you aren't advertising that it is paid, you should also have those safeguards just to uphold your own data integrity and your responses. And so we also get comments and shares on it, which requires moderation. You obviously don't want people lambasting your ads or cause or anything while you're there. And so that gives you the opportunity to either reply to them or to hide or delete those comments as well. And so here's a bit of our ad performance that we had over the entire 7-week period. So we had just under 2 million impressions, which is how many times the ad was shown to anybody, and just over 1 million reach, which is how many unique users the ads were shown to. So that means on average, it was just under 2 times that the average person saw the ad. Notably, during the fall campaign, when we had a narrow targeting just at farm parents, that frequency was about 3.5. So we were showing the ad to the same people over 3 times on average, which was a big cause and push for us to kind of broaden that. Once somebody sees the ad a couple of times and they're not interested, they're probably not going to be interested later, or at least you'll get diminishing returns in that. There is some evidence that repeatedly showing things to people, especially after a time gap, can make them more likely to join and click on your ad. But considering the time frame for our study, we just wanted to recruit our participants as quickly and efficiently as possible. From those million unique users, we got just over 14,000 clicks on the ad. Our cost per click in total was about 75 cents, which is pretty good all told. I'll break down those analytics a bit more later. But then the clicks onto the screener survey, so the people who consented to the study and at least started filling out that screener survey, the conversion rate was about 5.7%, which led to over 800 of those screener completions. And then going through those to see who was eligible and who wasn't, we had 271 participants who we invited to the study. And then all but 6 did respond to that invitation and at least started that initial pre-test survey. But then we did have pretty significant attrition and dropout throughout the study, leading to 164 total completions. And so our initial power calculations and everything for our analyses did rely on at least 160. So we did meet our goal there, but the dropout rate was a little concerning to us. Now, keep in mind, this is all entirely online. So it might be, a little bit less of a commitment. Once people agree to do it, they might be more likely to, drop out or ignore any future emails that you send their way. And so here's a bit more of a breakdown on the performance based on the fall and winter campaign. In general, the fall campaign performed worse than the winter campaign. There are probably a lot of reasons for this, but we only had gotten about 76 eligible and invited participants during the fall when we decided to then continue in the winter for an additional ad campaign in order to reach our goal. And so we were just under our $6,000 budget for the fall. And then our 3-week ad campaign in the winter matched that about $1,500 per week goal for our budget. But additionally, in the winter, you can see that we did have greater engagement from users, as well as a lot more shares, which is another thing I'll touch on in that shares are kind of a double-edged sword. They show your ad to more people for free, basically, but then you might get some biases from your recruitment, especially if you're doing any kind of behavioral research where you really want to focus specifically on who you're selecting and recruiting. You might want to be careful for that. But if you're doing something, more of a clinical trial or a pharmaceutical trial, then as long as they reach that inclusion criteria, then that snowball sampling method can be beneficial. And so here's just a bit more of a visual comparison to show how much different the ad campaigns were. Keep in mind, we're recruiting ag parents. So these are people who mostly work on the farm, or at least have a spouse that works on a farm. And so in the fall, it's both harvest season and back to school season, which could really hamper a lot of our recruitment efforts. And then in the winter is, at least for crop farmers, usually a lot more downtime compared to the summer. And so they were probably more likely to sign up for the ad and continue on through the study, but we don't know that for sure. I do want to touch on some spam responses that we got. So initially in the fall campaign, we had over 100 completions of our screener survey within an hour and a half. Prior to that, it was about 5 hours between completion on average. So obviously an anomaly with that. And they were all, we looked into the responses before we sent out the invitations. They were all complete gibberish, more or less. People were saying that they operated a dairy, but didn't have any cattle or didn't have any animals at all. So that was a pretty clear indicator to us that they're just trying to game the system and get that incentive. As well, a lot of the emails, every single one was at gmail.com with some first name, last name, johndoe@gmail.com or something similar. And then another point is we had a question in our screener that said, were you or did you personally witness a fatal agricultural injury event? So, not fatal, sorry, but a serious agricultural injury event. And so we were considering using that as an exclusion criteria for the study. And this person or group seemed to interpret that as an inclusion criteria and answered yes to all of them right in a row. So that was another clear indicator that these are not actual participants that are interested in the survey study in order to provide meaningful data. So needless to say, we did not invite those responses to the full study, but that's where the utility of that screener survey came into play. It is likely that it reduced some of the responses we saw in that people would sign up for the survey and then they saw the screener and they thought, oh, they might have been paid for that, essentially. Now, we were very deliberate in our wording for our informed consent, of course, and any incentive that was included. But I'm sure that that also had an impact in, being another barrier that we're trading safety and data integrity for ease of recruitment in that regard. And so a little bit on the comments and moderation, which seem to be a bit under discussed when you're considering using advertisements online. Overall, for our advertisements, about half of them were pretty, mundane, pretty innocuous. Some people were tagging others, sharing them, which depending on your study could be bad. You obviously wouldn't want that much bias in some of your recruitment. But it was beneficial for us in that people were sharing their stories. A lot of firefighters were commenting on the training images that we had, sharing their stories. And this was an opportunity for us to also engage in our community, where we work a lot with ag health and safety outreach. And so that was a great time for us to kind of make new connections with some people in this community that are outside of kind of the upper Midwest area that we can find ourselves kind of focused in on sometimes. And so we had, 18 plus long dialogue chains in the comments with these people, sharing resources, sharing stories, and really providing them an outlet to discuss a bit more about ag health and safety. And that resulted in some people asking for more information, which, while not relevant to our study, was very relevant for our center's goal and mission. Now, about 20% of these comments were bit case by case. Some of them, it really depends on whether or not you wanted to leave them or not, if you felt they were potentially dangerous or at least misinformation. We had on the tractor overturn image a lot of references to Mater from the Disney's Cars series. I haven't personally seen it, but a lot of people commenting on him going tipping tractors again. And so we saw this as kind of an opportunity for education with these people, so that we can kind of share a bit more about what our mission and goal is for our center and ag health and safety. And then another 20% or so were intentionally inflammatory, a lot of swearing, some racist remarks, which is very concerning, but overall just negative comments or sheer misinformation, which we either deleted or hid immediately on Facebook. And so you can hide comments which will be hidden to the general population, which are seeing your ads, but it'll still be visible to that user and their network of friends. So if you're seeing like a group that is, repeatedly commenting the same negative comments, then you may want to opt to delete that rather than hide them. However, that can also create a bit more concern in case they continue on either with different accounts or something similar. So those are all things to keep in mind whenever you're doing this. Depending on the topic of your study, this may be a concern, it may not be, but just remember that these ads, depending on what you're recruiting, might be shown to millions of people. And so there may be some bad actors out there that you do want to keep an eye out for. And so the question really comes down to, is it worth it? We felt that it was worth it for us. We got our participants we needed within our budget that we had planned for. In total, our cost per eligible participant that we had sent the invitations out to was $36. However, our cost per completed response after all the dropout and attrition was $64. And so this doesn't include any personnel time. So this is strictly in from the budgeting for recruitment and incentive, or not incentives rather. One thing to note was that the engagements do increase the reach. So more people sharing it will bring that dollar amount down. But as I said, it'll introduce some bias to your responses depending on that's okay or not with your study design. And I just have a couple of other comparisons here. So from the literature, we found quotes for Facebook advertisements ranging from under $1 per participant to mid-30s for each participant. Our study obviously was above that. However, we are targeting a more niche population, a much more specific population. A lot of Facebook advertisements are targeting a very broad general population, which, again, is really going to depend on your study design and who you're interested in. The mailed surveys traditionally are similar with those online quotes in the past, really. However, that's really more tailored towards surveys where you can send out, a paper mailer for the survey and then they can fill it out and send it back in. And same with telephone surveys. Those are generally much more expensive and also include a lot more personnel time. But it is, the trade-off is you do get more opportunity for qualitative feedback and for more open-ended response. And then another comment I wanted to add in terms of deciding whether or not this is worth it is that the moderation aspect of these ads is every hour of every day as long as the ad is running. And so most of the negative comments that we had that required immediate attention were on Saturday. And so we were all remote work during this time, but you don't really want to log in and deal with something on a Saturday, even if you can, you can just do it from your phone, especially if you have Facebook on your phone. But some people may not be interested in that. And so it's another thing to keep in mind as you're considering using Facebook ads or other social media for that purpose. I did want to talk about some of the benefits that you can get from this that aren't just, meeting your criteria and population or recruitment targets. Depending on your goal for your office and position, you can have a valuable discussion with the community. We do a lot of outreach, and so this was a very valuable opportunity for us to kind of reach out and make some new connections and kind of spread the word of ag health and safety in a space that we hadn't really explored much before this. You can also reach a changing demographic. On average, compared to at least telephone surveys, Facebook is much younger and much more diverse, especially with like landline, random digit dialing methods. So it's very helpful at reaching a very specific population. Their targeting methods are very comprehensive, but they might not get down to the level that you're interested in, but it'll at least get you most of the way there. So if you are interested in recruiting a very particular demographic, then that can be very useful in reaching a broader sampling frame than you would have otherwise been able to reach, or at least made it more efficient in how you're spending your budget. It can also lead to an increased prominence on Facebook. If your office runs a Facebook page or your center runs a Facebook page, this will give you an opportunity to kind of build your followers there and increase your the spread of your research and the work that you're doing. So we had 14,800 page engagements during this campaign. Most of those were clicks on the ads themselves, but over 500 of those were new to the page, to the Children's Center page, which was great to see and always appreciated for us increasing our prominence on Facebook. Now, some less tangible costs is that you're getting bigger on Facebook. So you have more people, more random people that you might not be interested in reaching out to, who are then coming into your kind of sphere on Facebook or other social media. And so if those are bad actors, then that can be a negative. Now that said, we didn't notice any of that, any of the negative comments or feedback spilling out from the ads. They were all very self-contained there, but I don't want to say it's not a possibility. Also, the fact that it can be stressful in all hours. We had some conversations back and forth on like Saturday mornings saying, hey, what do we want to do about this comment? Should we reply? Should we hide it? Do we want to delete it? And so, especially if you have hourly staff doing this, that might just be outside the scope of their work and you can't really rely on them to do that. And so that kind of puts it all on you or salaried staff. And so that's definitely a concern regarding these ads. And then the last cost and concern are some ethical and IRB questions in that you are showing this information in these images to people who have not consented to be shown them. This typically isn't a concern with a lot of IRBs. There's advertisements everywhere nowadays, but you do want to be very mindful of the imagery that you're including, the wording that you're including on those ads, and how you're interacting with those people prior to any consenting for the study. So if this does seem like something that you might be interested in, ensure that in any IRB review, you have a plan for how you're going to go about that, which can really help allay some of their concerns with this. And so another couple of other takeaways from this is that screener survey, kind of that net to capture some scam or sham responses is imperative. It's incredibly valuable, especially when you are advertising an incentive. We had a pilot test a couple of years back before we ran this, as well as another small project which did not include this screener survey. It just immediately took them to the consent form and then the survey itself. And we had, in that case, several hundred responses, which were spread out, but intermixed with real responses, which we then had to spend additional time combing through, figuring out what was real, what was fake. And we probably didn't get all of them, and we probably got rid of some responses that were legitimate. But we did have some team there, some help with some of our IS teams, using some machine learning to identify and weight whether responses were likely real or fraudulent. And so while that did work well, a 90% success rate for 500 fake responses still leaves 50 that got through, which is plenty enough to sway a lot of the results that you're interested in. And then another is that the social capital for your page, how well established you are in a community, is really kind of unknown, and I haven't really seen anybody measure that in some way when it comes to advertising and how that interacts with marketing in general. But it is likely, in my opinion, very valuable for advertising, so that if people have any concerns, they can turn to that page and their concerns might be immediately answered there, or they can reach out to you and ask any questions. That said, across the million plus people who saw our ad, we did not receive a single question outside of the Facebook ad comments. So no email or phone calls advertised on the consent and information page at all. But it is possible that that would happen. And so that's all I have for you. If you have any other further questions or anything, we have plenty of time for me to take some questions now. You can also reach out to us via email, phone number, any of the above. And thank you again for having me.
On behalf of Victor, thanks so much, Rick. We really appreciate your talk. Are there any questions? I'll start off with a couple of questions. So one is, would you do this again? And two, would you adjust your budget either up or down if you did it again?
Yeah, so currently in this same study, our first phase for the first year was recruiting farm parents, and now our second phase is recruiting farm and ag educators, so high school teachers, FFA advisors. And so we're considering turning towards Facebook ads for that as well. Again, granted, that is even a smaller subset of people to recruit. But if you are, especially if you're recruiting for a general population, I would say yes, absolutely. Facebook ads seem like they are a very valuable tool, and the broader your target population is, the cheaper it can be. As for the budget itself, I would increase the budget personally if it's a very narrow focus. So for example, our initial budget of $6,000 wasn't enough to recruit. And so we did kind of have to shift some things around to make sure that we had a budget for that second round. But knowing what we know now, I think we'd be able to plan accordingly and ensure that we could reach our recruitment goals before running out of any budget concerns.
Great. So we have a question from Maria. And she's asking, I'm hoping you can talk more about the burden you envision that moderation has on a study team, both time and effort and the experience of conducting the moderation.
Yeah, so as I said, we had some back and forths on weekend mornings with regards to what to do with a couple of comments. In general, if you have an outreach team or anybody or person within your office or center that works on Facebook and posts often and has experience with moderation, I'd reach out to them and see if they'd consider teaming up or at least working together to not necessarily handle that entirely. If you do have a center that will offer that service, that would be great. But at least to kind of be the deciding vote if you're unsure what to do with some comments or anything. Another option is, if anything even remotely negative comes through, especially outside of office hours, you can elect to hide those comments and then come back Monday or Tuesday and walk through them and then unhide them if you determine you are okay having that, or you want to use it as kind of a teachable moment or an opportunity for communication.
That's good advice. The next question is, given a choice, do you think the respondents you got preferred learning about your study via Facebook?
That's a good question. One regret we have with our study, I'd say, is that we didn't ask for any feedback or like a "how did you hear about us" field or something similar. Granted, it was a long pretest, it was like 120 plus questions, so we didn't want to burden them too much. But I would say that people were pretty neutral in terms of learning about our study via Facebook. In general, I'd say they lean towards positive because I think safety and health is generally viewed positively. People, especially childhood safety. We did get some comments on people wanting us to stay out of their hair. They don't want any additional regulations or any OSHA inspections or anything. But in general, I think I'd say I'd lean towards positive with that.
Okay, the next question, and they first start out saying that your talk was interesting and helpful. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like working with Facebook administrators and creating and managing the ad?
Yeah, I'm glad you found it helpful. So the way the Facebook Ads Manager works is that it's very much all on you, honestly. You don't really work closely with anybody at Facebook, although they do have that option, but it is a paid service. In general, we thought that it wouldn't be worth it. We thought we could do it well ourselves. And we obviously had some hiccups here and there, but I felt like we were successful in that. But there is the opportunity to reach out to Facebook. They also review your imagery so that if your imagery violates any of their content guidelines or anything similar, then you might have more interaction with them. But it is very much you set it up on your own. And if you run into issues, they do have a support team, which you can reach out to.
Okay, and the next question is, can you talk about your experience with ad approval through the IRB? And then just building on the last question, and through Facebook's review process, and what was difficult or easy, and any lessons learned?
Yeah, so we were upfront with our IRB. We had several images that we were considering. In total, I only showed 2 images, but we had 5 total, with that overturned tractor being the most most eye-catching, essentially. And so when we submitted for our IRB protocol, we included those images in there as well as the wording that we would use. And they didn't have any issues with it. Now that said, at least in Marshfield Clinic's IRB, I have had very few issues in the past in terms of any concerns related to something like that. But if your IRB is a bit stricter or more conservative, then I would definitely try and tone down the images a bit. That said, stock imagery is always a good option, especially if you don't have a good bank of images. We do a lot of those safety trainings, so we had all of those images that we took ourselves that we could easily post, and that seemed to go over well. And with Facebook's review process, it's not very much back and forth. I think it might be fairly automated. Once you submit the ad, you schedule for when it starts, and you technically can have it start immediately, but it will go through some type of review where they just look at the wording and imagery. I think they're pretty opaque with everything, but that really only took about half an hour to an hour on average, and then it was ready to go, and we didn't run into any issues with that.
Okay. The next question is, did your team use or consider using Instagram in order to reach a younger population?
Yeah. So when you configure the ad, you have a couple dozen options of how you want the ad to be presented to people. So be that an image or a video or a reel. I don't really use Instagram that much personally. I don't really use Facebook that much personally either. But there's a whole bunch of different options for where you want your ad posted, where you want your ad shared, and Instagram is one of them, since Facebook and Instagram and Meta is all like under the same umbrella now. So The hard part with that is a lot of Facebook ads are still images, and a lot of Instagram. While there is a lot of pictures, there's also a lot of video content as well. And so still images do not integrate into the video platforms as well. If you have like a creative services team or something similar and you can have a video advertisement, then Instagram seems like it would be much more valuable. But that said, we were also targeting parents of young children. And so we do have the responses, and I'm trying to remember, I think the average age of our respondents was in their mid-30s. So I think Instagram would be a good option for a younger audience. And even with TikTok being big lately, if you have the opportunity for video advertisements, then I think that might even be a better bet. But that is a separate environment, separate program. And so that the principles would still apply, but the actual specifics and setting everything up would likely differ a lot.
Okay, and slightly related question, also starts out saying great presentation and discussion. The question is it feasible to target a population on Facebook or Instagram users based on age group or geographic location, like the county or the zip code?
Yeah. So Facebook allows age ranges. They don't let you set the age range. They have their own buckets. But it is really only 18 plus that you can target ads to. And then there's some ranges like, 18 to 29, 30 to 30, the pretty standard ranges. But then if you're also targeting much like an older or largely elderly population, if you want to, focus on say only 80 plus year olds, they do cut off at 65. So it's only 65 and above. In terms of location, you can get down to the, I want to say state level. We were doing nationally. We had considered doing state by state in order to kind of focus in on a couple of places. And so you can do state, but I don't believe you can get down to the zip code. And I don't believe you can get down to the county either. I think it's only down to state.
Okay, good to know. And then in terms of the study itself, how did you pay the participants after they completed the study? Did you collect the mailing address, or did you use like PayPal or some other online service?
Yeah, so we offered two options, either an Amazon gift card or a check mailed. And unfortunately, when we were first setting everything up, and after we had written the grant and were approved for the grant, our institute implemented a rule that you had to collect a physical mailing address for any incentive disbursement. So even the folks who had requested an electronic gift card that we would just email the code to them, we still had to collect their physical mailing address as well. And so we did change our wording to be upfront with that in the informed consent, saying here's the incentive, but we will require a physical address to receive the incentive. And it was pretty split 50-50 between folks who preferred a check versus folks who preferred the Amazon gift card.
Okay, are there any other questions? I'm going to take that as a no. And here's Rick's contact information. I am going to just share a few announcements if I could share my screen, Rick.
Yeah, you bet. And thank you again, everyone, for having me. I'm glad people found it helpful. And if you have any other questions or concerns, or if I wasn't able to answer any questions, please reach out to me, email or phone, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
Again, thank you so much, Rick. We really appreciate it. I'm going to just share some upcoming announcements and we will be good to go. So our next presentation will be in March, and it will be by Dr. Olayinka Shayambola, and she's going to talk about clinical trials in the community. So please spread the word. And before that, we have another upcoming event. We're doing a recruitment strategies for clinical trials workshop, and that's going to be February 21st. And that's going to be a 2-hour workshop. It is virtual. Please contact my colleague, Allie Molnar, or you can contact me if you'd like to get information about how to register for this workshop. And then finally, if you're thinking about doing a multi-site research study, please reach out. Our address is right here, researchnetworks@list.wisc.edu. So both Allie and I can help you plan and implement any kind of multi-site study. So I'm going to stop sharing. Again, thank you everyone for joining us. And Rick, it was a fantastic presentation. We so appreciate your time and the information.
Thank you, everyone, as well.